The Dallas Cowboys held their first training camp practice of the year. We'll tell you who the biggest winners and losers are from that practice. All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're going to be discussing the biggest and most noteworthy things from the Dallas Cowboys practice on Tuesday. It's a pretty light practice, so just keep that in mind. We'll also talk about some of the training camp press conference stuff, which was quite something, I guess. I don't know. But let's first start with some winners for practice. Let's be positive, Landon, because I didn't necessarily feel positive coming out of yesterday. But who were some of the biggest winners from your eyes?
Well, again, keeping with a little bit of salt added in, this is a ramp up practice at this point. There's no real competitive practice. This is competitive portions of the practice. It's a lot of drills, a lot of kind of getting into the swing of things. I would say that the most that they did competitive was probably, I think they did a couple 7-on-7 periods, if I'm not mistaken. So nothing, obviously no pads, and that's all happening, I think, on Tuesday of next week. So, or maybe Wednesday. So I think, what we saw is a lot of the kind of things that you see in those sort of practices. Wide receivers shine a lot in those situations. So we saw Jalen Tolbert obviously make a huge catch in some of the clips, like a little bit of a back shoulder throw from Dak near the goal line. And then it had a couple other good positive reviews. This is not surprising for Jalen Tolbert. Like, this is kind of the starting point for where we should be with him at this point. I think he was able to translate a lot of what he did in the training camp into the regular season, but it didn't quite fully translate the way we had hoped for. I'm really hoping that he kind of continues the drumbeat in training camp, where we've seen him be positive and have a lot of really good positive things. And then this year, even further kind of bring that into the regular season. So day one in the books, and I think that we've gotten some positive drum beats from Jalen Tolbert. I would say we heard some positive things about Jalen Brooks as well. So I think, that's not surprising that we saw some of the young wide receivers taking advantage of CD not being here, and getting opportunities and making the most of those opportunities.
What did you think of Jalen Tolbert's catch that he had right at the goal line? Just like a kind of spinning catch, separating from the DB. Like, that's the kind of body control. I don't want to say that it reminds me of CeeDee Lamb, but it kind of reminds me of CeeDee Lamb a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, it's the kind of confidence that we've seen from him these last 2 years, as opposed to, early on, right? Is that the attacking the football, understanding what he needs to do to get to the ball and make the play. Just a level of confidence that it's his ball and that he's going to go get it. And that once he's in the route, he attacks the football. He's not just waiting for it to arrive to him. It really feels like that over the last 2 off seasons that him and Dak have developed a high level of chemistry, right? Where Dak feels confident that he can throw in the ball, even if it's a little bit off target or away from him a little bit, just to kind of avoid defenders, and that Tolbert will go and get the ball and not just, get a hand on it. He'll actually make the dive, get both hands, come up with it. So that's the kind of thing that Dak needs from these younger guys, right? Specifically Tolbert more than the rest of these guys, because he has the most experience with them. They need Tolbert to play with a level of veteran competency is really the word I'm looking for. I mean, it's not that he needs to be a superstar. He just needs to be a reliable pass catcher, a reliable option for Dak, so that it sets a nice floor for the wide receiver 3 position. And then from here, if he can improve on that, and then if we can get something out of, either of the other 2 Jalen's or any of these other wide receivers, I think you're going to start to see a wide receiver room that's going to start to rise, all ships.
They don't. I mean, he doesn't need to be CeeDee Lamb. He doesn't need to be
No.
Amari Cooper. But could he potentially be like 2020 or 2021 Michael Gallup?
Yeah.
Like that's the hope, right? Like be that third receiver that when you get called upon, it's not a massive drop off in
Yeah.
play, right? Like he's not going to be as dynamic as CD. He doesn't have the speed of Brandon Cooks, but just be a reliable option. And this is one of the benefits of CeeDee Lamb holding out. I mean, there's not a lot of benefits of
No,
your
it's
best
true.
player not being there, but it does give Dak and Jalen Tolbert a lot more reps and opportunities to develop a rapport. I mean, and we saw it from day one. I mean, we saw it last year, but it seems like already Jalen Tolbert and Dak are on the right page. I am excited to see what it looks like 2, 3, 4 weeks from now, assuming CeeDee Lamb continues to not be at practice.
Yeah, and just again to kind of reiterate as well, it sounds like Jalen Brooks also had a pretty good day. Another guy who, as a rookie came in and surprised a lot of us with a continued drumbeat that we didn't think would go on as long. It
Yep.
went on into the regular season and even had some nice plays in the regular season. So I think Jalen Brooks is on the Jalen Tolbert track, if only maybe a season or two behind him a little bit.
All right. Any other winners from practice yesterday? Again, this was a very, very light practice. No hitting, no tackling, a lot of 7-on-7 stuff. So take that all with a grain of salt. But anybody else that stood out to you?
We're going to talk about some second year folks in this next segment, so I'll save some of that stuff for that segment. But I will point out that it did seem like Trey Lance had a kind of an up and down day.
Yeah.
Was throwing the ball a little high. I mean, that's he could be excited. It's the first time to kind of get this out in on the Oxnard field and kind of translate what he's been working on all off season into that. So we're going to give him obviously plenty of space, to kind of figure that out. But it did feel like he was coming out a little bit hot, throwing things a little bit high.
That's been his problem. Like even going back to North Dakota State and San Francisco is like when he's inaccurate, it's usually high because he's trying to put extra zip on the ball. And I mean, usually for a quarterback, you'd rather miss short than miss high because missing high is where you get into a lot of trouble.
And honestly, the interception wasn't necessarily his fault, but it kind of is indicative of the issue, right? Is that if you throw it high and your receiver gets their hands on it but doesn't catch it, suddenly you have a very soft floating ball in the middle of the secondary where there's only defensive players. There's lots of opportunity for interceptions, which is what happened yesterday in practice. A young linebacker got the first interception. So, yeah, I think it kind of an up and down day for the young quarterback. But obviously we're in early days. It's just something that's worth pointing out.
All right, let's talk about some of the young players in year two. We'll talk about John Stevens, who's returning from an injury. We'll talk about Luke Schoonmaker, who is also returning from an injury. And let's also get a Mazi Smith weight update. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a quick reminder to our everydayers, Landon will be out in Oxnard, as Jerry Jones calls it, next week. So we're going to be doing some post-practice pods that will go live on YouTube. So make sure that you check them out there. The podcast itself will go live the following day, early in the morning. So we will keep you up to date with all of the Dallas Cowboys training camp news. But Lane, let's get to Mazi Smith, who we got a report. Actually, we got two reports from Mazi that I thought were interesting. Number one, Brian Broaddus revealed that Mazi Smith was at 293 pounds last year, down from 335 during his days in Michigan. And then this year, he's up to 310 pounds. So of those two nuggets, which one was more noteworthy to you?
Well, first of all, I had to do a quick Google to see if Weight Watchers is still a company, because if they are, then we should definitely get them as a sponsor for this segment, right? And get Weight Watchers hats and everything. Yeah, I mean, I think this is. I think that this is positive news. That he's 310 pounds. You know, let me put it into context. We knew that he had a shoulder surgery early in the offseason.
Yeah.
And we knew that he was under 300 pounds at the end of last season. So, you know, we were all kind of nervously whistling past the graveyard that he would even be able to get over 300 pounds of solid weight. So for him to get to 310, I think is very positive. And I think that, you know, he can play nose tackle at 310, especially with the strength that he's got and we've seen. So, I think that that's a positive update. You know, I mean, look, I'll go even kind of back up a little bit. I think the fact that, you know, you managed to avoid having any of the second-year players avoid active pup, and that they're all able to get cleared and come back and practice right away. And I mean, all of them, like Mazi, Schoon, John Stevens Jr., Demo came back and has obviously gained some weight and looks good as well. And he's been cleared. So the fact that you were able to get these guys cleared and back into practice on day one, I think is a huge thing for all these guys, because, you know, I think Mazi and Schoon are kind of tied together in this sense that they've got a lot to make up for from last season because of, you know, whatever their situations were, whether it was injury or just, you know, an inability to kind of get on the field. They've got a lot of goodwill to make up for, and I think that these two folks are excited to kind of get back on the field and show out a little bit, because, you know, there's been just a lot of kind of writing off of that class last year, but it looks like, you know, they've come back ready to roll, and it'll be good to see exactly, you know, what they have for the Cowboys in training camp this year, because those two guys turning it around and having better seasons this year is paramount to the Cowboys having a good year.
I agree. I'll note that Charles Robinson from Yahoo Sports said he thought Mazi looked a little sluggish yesterday. Probably the case, right? I mean, he's probably getting used to playing at a new weight. I don't know how much conditioning he was able to do when he was coming off the shoulder injury. I'm not surprised, right? But the good news is that he at least has somewhat of an NFL body to play the position that he was drafted for now. So we'll see if he's able to work himself into shape. More importantly, whether he can keep the weight on, because that's always my concern with some of these defensive tackles, is that either you're going to eat yourself out of the league, which doesn't seem like an issue for Mazi, but when we get to November, is he down under 300 pounds? Is he staying right at 310 pounds and keeping his conditioning up? I'll be curious to see that one. Go ahead.
Real quick, I don't know anything about being sluggish. I mean, I don't know how much that really plays into a light walkthrough practice, but I will say that they did post video of him hitting the sleds, and he has all the pop in his hands that he's ever had. Like, he absolutely demolished that sled. So the power is still there, and his technique of firing his hips and his hands up front, and then kind of getting his feet involved, that all looks in place, which is, you know, good news for the Cowboys.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention is Luke Schoonmaker back on the field.
Yeah.
He also had an off-season surgery. He's been really banged up all the way back to his days in Michigan. Was on the field for the first practice, working with the first team. I saw him make a little catch over the middle of the field again.
Seam pass. Yep.
It's a little seam catch. Very, very limited in what the Cowboys did. But again, I think it was fantastic to hear, not on PUP. It seemed like he was working in full yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, again, you can't always. I mean, there's not much to tell with some of these clips, but the way that he's making his cuts, you know, the kind of confidence, forcefulness, and understanding, no hesitancy. I mean, you know, those are the things that you can kind of glean from that stuff right now. As the training camp goes on, you hope to see a little bit more. But so far, so good for the young guys. I mean, being on the field, I think is you know, step one for them improving, and so far so good on that front.
Yeah, John Stevens, back on the
Yeah.
field. He got very positive reports yesterday. I know Brian brought us that he was moving very, very well. Um, he's a real wild card on this
Yeah.
offense, man, because they just don't have anybody that's like him. Even in their wide receiver core, they don't really have a lot of size. Like Jalen Brooks is probably their biggest receiver.
Really?
I mean,
Yeah, I
who else
guess
would it
you're
be?
right. Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, it's true. They don't necessarily have an above the rim type guy in the tight end room outside of him. They don't really have too much of an above the rim guy in the receiver room. I mean, really, that was Gallup's role, right? In a lot of
Yeah.
ways, like when he was healthy, was the kind of go up, grab the ball, toe touch, get it, in bounds. Like, and not that that toe touch situation is what we're going to be seeing with Stevens, but as far as a guy playing above the rim or catching a fade near the goal line, I think red zone, touchdown weapon, like that's kind of that's why you would have potentially kept a rookie undrafted free agent tight end last season if he hadn't gotten injured, right? Is
Oh,
that
yeah.
it's like the classic, yeah, he doesn't do 90% of what you need to do in football very well, but the 10% that he does do well is incredibly valuable. So
Yes.
valuable that you would put him on your roster. So yeah, I think if he's able to kind of, improve on his route running game even a little bit more, create some more separation as a tight end with that big body near the goal line, that could be incredibly valuable spot for the Cowboys, just to kind of, because at times there were issues with converting, red zone trips into
Oh,
touchdowns.
yeah.
And so having another kind of option down there, a different sort of a different type of option, right? A different type of way of attacking the red zone when things get condensed, going up as opposed to trying to work in the condensed space of the red zone. I think that makes a lot of sense.
And the last thing I wanted to mention on the injury front, Trayvon Diggs is on the PUP list. He is the only player on the 90-man roster that's on the PUP. I believe it was Todd Archer said, don't expect it to be a long stay. We've seen this happen before with some other players coming back from injuries. They seem like they'll give them a week or two to get the conditioning up and then ease them into the practice. So I would assume over the next 2 weeks we'll see Diggs back on the field. This is nothing to be concerned about. Nothing.
Yeah, I would too. Just based on the videos that we've seen of him, in his training right before coming into camp, like
Yep.
he's clearly near the end of his recovery period. And again, the Cowboys have a long history of when it's close, like when it's coming down to the wire, oh, like he's at the last little cycle, Britt needs him for maybe 2 more weeks. They always err on the side of giving him an extra week, giving him an extra 2 weeks, as they should. They don't need Diggs to be back into this early part of practices. So
Nope.
I think they make sure that he's healthy, and then they'll start working him in. But even then, I would imagine a heavy rotation for Diggs throughout training camp, just to kind of make sure that knee is stable for the regular season.
All right, Lane, I want to save a lot of time for this training camp press conference that the Dallas Cowboys had that was over an hour long. Let's talk about the biggest and most important nuggets and notes coming out of that press conference next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find as many quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals like you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every day, or on Monday's show, we will have a breakdown of Sunday's practice. So make sure you tune in for that. Landon will actually be out there in Oxnard giving you a full report. So make sure you tune in. But Landon, let's talk about the press conference. What was your I mean, we could talk about a certain issue or a quote, but what was just your general theme coming out of this press conference?
I'm never going to get that hour back of my life. That
No, you
no
will
matter
not.
what I do, that hour is never going to come back in my life. It was a train wreck. I mean, it was just honestly, it was boring, is what it was, and that's the thing that I think that is, different than a lot of these Cowboys press conferences, is that as opposed to like it being filled with Jerryisms and it being funny at least, and maybe you didn't get any information out of it, but at the very least you got a funny Jerry glory hole quote or something ridiculous.
It didn't seem endearing at all.
No, it seemed defensive.
Exactly.
Look, I mean, I think I understand why they're being defensive, but at the same time, like you made your bed, buddy. You're lying in it. So, yeah, I mean, I think that it seemed there's been times when they've had defensive press conferences before, but it's also been kind of humorous and lighthearted and fun. It doesn't seem like that's the case now. It seems like Jerry was upset about a lot of what was going on. I mean, listen, I got to be honest with you. Like, they got to take Jerry's mic away. Like, they just got to do it at this point. I have been the one who has been defending Jerry for years, that he's still very savvy and still, sharp in his old age. I just don't think that that's necessarily the case anymore. And I think that's, if Steven is running this show, that Steven should be running the show. Like, I don't know necessarily that I'm a huge Stephen Jones fan more than Jerry Jones fan, but I think this idea of like Steven kind of tentatively running the deal while trying to work around Jerry, who is, really the person in charge. It's not a good command structure. And, and I think that, some of the stuff that Jerry said yesterday doesn't make any sense at all. And if he believes it, that's a problem. But that's the thing, is I don't believe that that either Jerry believes some of the stuff he said or that Steven believes some of the stuff that Jerry said. So I just think that, if more than anything, it felt like this was a constant, defensive front, justifying the way that they have operated this offseason, the way that they've handled contracts in this situation. And it just feels like for the first year in a long time, the convergence of the Cowboys fandom that is upset with the fact that nothing ever changes and happens to arrive at the same time that the Jerry's, folksyisms really start to fall flat and really just don't work anymore. And now it's become a contentious relationship between, the fans, the media, and ownership. And it made for really, terrible press conference. And frankly, when Mike McCarthy finally got the first football question, I was way more relieved than Mike McCarthy was. Honestly, I was so done with hearing like them talk about it. I was just excited to hear somebody talk about something that actually had to do with football.
Even that question, Mike McCarthy gets a football question and he says, "Oh, good, a football question." And Jerry has to chime in, "Oh, this is football, right?" Like, what we're talking about is football too.
I think Jerry forgot that they were talking about football, and he was just like, "Oh yeah, we're talking about football. That's right, yeah." So I don't know.
I actually think coming out of that press conference, Mike McCarthy looks the best. I mean, I thought he did a really good job of taking ownership of falling short last year, talking about like, unless we go deep, I mean, unless we win the final game of the year, it's going to be looked as a failure. I actually came out of that press conference thinking Mike McCarthy probably is one of the guys that's right for this job because he can tolerate the Joneses and still put on a very productive product on the field.
Yeah.
But man, you're right. It was a train wreck. The thing is I felt like usually what we say in these press conferences, like usually you and I joke about like, do we need to cover these? Because there's nothing that's going to come out of these press conferences because they're just so tight-lipped, but they're also loose-lipped in sometimes what they say. Yeah. But I mean, they revealed a lot in the sense of like, to me, listening to that, I thought Jerry Jones basically sounded defeated in the sense of like, we would like to keep Dak, but it's not up to us anymore. And it doesn't sound like Dak has us kind of over a barrel, right? and it's up to him whether he wants to be back. And I can't afford him. I don't know. It was weird. Then Stephen Jones revealed that Micah and CD both believe that they should be the highest paid non-quarterback in the league, and maybe that's just some public posturing here. But
that's not surprising, right?
Not surprising. It's not
Yeah.
surprising, but I don't know, man. Then there was Jerry Jones talking about how paying 3 players would take up 75% of their cap.
70% of the
well, he
cap,
said 70, and then it got up to 80 at one point. He said 80% of their cap at one point, which,
I mean, that's not even close to being true. That like it's not even half of that. I wouldn't imagine 35% for 3 players.
Yeah.
I don't even think that's correct.
And then they started off the press conference talking about why he's optimistic. It's because they have all these Pro Bowlers and All Pros, and that counts guys like Ezekiel Elliott, who hasn't made a Pro Bowl since 2018, and Eric Kendricks, who hasn't made a Pro Bowl in forever. Like I don't know. It was all very weird.
Here's the thing. I feel very torn about a lot of this stuff because I do think that the Joneses have a point in some of this stuff, but they have been absolutely atrocious at making that point. Yeah. And frankly, I understand why the Joneses are a little bit upset, because the truth of the matter is that as far as a front office goes, look, we can debate whether the pros and cons of what they did in the offseason, but it's hard to argue that the Joneses didn't do a good enough job of talent acquisition to get them in the position to win 12 games the last 3 seasons. So I can understand why they're upset by the results not being the way they are. And I can understand why they're upset that the fans are upset with them, when in reality, the fans will probably be upset with the coach and the players more than they are with the ownership.
The coaches the players need to take just as much responsibility as the front office does.
But the ownership has done a worse than terrible job at taking ownership of their part of it, and then a worse job of doing any sort of course correction job to try to rectify the situation. And that is ultimately what has caused all the ill will from the fandom, is that they continue to see the same thing happening over and over again. And then the Cowboys front office continuing to bang their head against that same wall this offseason after getting the same results in the playoffs the previous year.
2 quotes that I just want to mention before we go that I thought summed up a lot of the press conference. So number 1, Stephen Jones was talking about these contracts and the order of which they're trying to get these contracts done. And he mentioned Micah Parsons' contract he said basically offhand, we'll be in this situation next year with Micah, with, referring to CD, like he's going to want to be, going into the 5th year of his deal, he's going to be wanting a new contract, and we might be looking at a holdout. But they can sign Michael right now if they wanted to. Like, they don't have to wait until next year to get a deal done. Like, they can get it done right now and avoid all that stuff and maybe get him for cheaper. The other one that I think at the end of the press conference that really bothered me, Jerry Jones was talking off to the side to, I think it was John Machota, Clarence Hill.
The walk-off, yeah.
Yeah, and he was talking about how the salary cap, and I'll read you the quote. I'm just going to say this to y'all. Give me some credit, okay? You don't think I'm good with numbers. You don't think I know how to add and subtract. Do I know how to talk and sell? I realize all the criticism, and I understand it. As a matter of fact, I try to stir it up, and I have since I got here. That's good. Be relevant. It works. That's the biggest problem, is I think Jerry Jones just wants the Cowboys to be on all these discussions and be relevant and be the first thing that the Cowboys, the first thing on Undisputed or whatever those ESPN shows are, rather than just keeping quiet and getting your business done. Like, I don't see the Chiefs having to try to do this stuff to stay relevant, because they just win big games and that keeps them relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something to consider, and it's a point. But at the end of the day, like, we can argue about all the different things that affect this team and the effect that they have in the team in the playoffs. The ownership needs to be more football oriented. There's just no way around that. I think that's true. I still think the players and the coaches need to play better in the playoffs.
Don't disagree. Like, of course,
that's ultimately my issue.
I just don't think they're exclusive either.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that's the real issue, is that the Joneses may be the third most to blame in this situation, if you were talking coaches, players, as far as what's going on. But the way they've behaved has not endeared themselves to anyone. No. And that's why they're continuing to draw the majority of the criticism, because they're refusing to change their methodology, even though it is in part part of the problem.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. You can follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here on Monday with more training camp coverage.